I am in London pursuing a career in comedy really, but with a view to keeping all the things I want to do happening, including acting and writing and creating a musical and playing in bands and all that. I was born here back in '75 when being born here was enough. My folks are Australian, but Dad was over here studying, so I got back then being just the geography was enough to get a passport. That changed in the '80s, but yeah, so I'm a dual citizen. The idea of moving to the UK came when I was frustrated and not really getting anywhere living in Melbourne, having left Perth. Went to Melbourne, just banged my head against the doors a little bit, and I had considered just going, bugger it, let's go give it a bash in the UK, but that was just a tiny little seed. My eureka moment was after Edinburgh Festival 2005. I did Melbourne Comedy Festival 2005, got picked up and taken to Edinburgh. It went so well in Edinburgh that I didn't really stop to think about it. I've been trying to make a go of this industry, whatever this is, the performance arts, for 10 years, and suddenly everything I could possibly have wanted was in my lap. Management, DVD companies and promoters and stuff wanting to produce my stuff. So I said to Sarah, this is happening. And we went, okay, well, when do we move? It's nice to think of this idea that we all just want to go walk about because we've got something deeply Australian in our blood. I suspect it's nothing more than the combination of affluence and distance. The fact is we're rich enough to travel. We're educated enough to travel. When I say educated, I mean as opposed to, middle America who sort of don't have a connection to their origins anymore because they've been American for so long. In Australia, we still see ourselves, we're new enough to know that our origins are over there. And so Europe just beckons and beckons and beckons, and I think it's just a matter of financial ability and knowledge that there's more. And the further away you are from something, the more you crave knowledge of it. And we know it's there and want to go sniff it out. People in the UK are constantly going, I'd love to go to Australia, but that flight, I just could never do it. And you're like, it's 20 hours. That's just like going down to Dunsborough 6 times. Sometimes, I've done that a million times. I grew up in Western Australia where a friend would have a wedding down in Kojonup and you go down for the wedding and drive back. I mean, it's not, and people do it a bit in the UK, but I've driven across the Nullarbor a couple of times. It's the best fun. And people go, you drove. How long does that take? Sort of 40, 50 hours, something like that. And they're like, I don't understand. And so I think the distance you have to travel within our country makes the distances sort of irrelevant. So to that extent, distances have stopped mattering. I think a lot of Australians live in London because it's the next big city. Everyone from Perth moves to Melbourne because it's the next big city. It's just the next one geographically that you can stop at. So everyone from Perth goes to Melbourne, and once they've been in Melbourne for a couple of years, if they're still itchy, they go to Sydney. And if so many people from Perth go Sydney, London, because they go, I want to go and live in a big city. And they go to Sydney and go, I want to go live in a bigger city. It's kind of the most culturally, London's the most culturally familiar, truly international big city. So if you've got that desire to live somewhere big, you're more inclined to go to London than New York, just because we feel culturally much more connected to it. And it's bigness and its darkness and its rubbish and its meanness, and I think it's easy to make a sweeping statement about a city. It's just like saying Perth is quiet and boring. Perth might be quiet and boring, but on any given Friday night when I'm with my mates doing nude runs on the beach in my uni years, it's not quiet and boring, it's massive and exciting. And London's the same. It can be huge and overbearing, but on any given night you're just in your local pub with your friends. And I think sometimes people get scared of big cities because they see the big city, but actually within that big city you've got your own community, and you don't actually get affected by that pervasive enormity. I tell you what, I wouldn't move to London to give it a bash. I decided that ages ago. Having moved to Melbourne from zero and taking the 2 years, playing 3 years, 4 years, playing in cover bands and not getting any auditions and all that, I would never move to a place like London to give it a bash. I only moved here because there was a guarantee that it was going to kick off. And the minute I felt like it wasn't, I wouldn't be here. You don't want to be poor in London, I don't reckon. It'd be a shit place to be poor. I mean, one of the reasons I'm really happy is for the first time in my life, I can afford to get a flat, and for my very heavily pregnant wife to not have to be working right up until and then straight after the birth. And so all that has come at the same time. So for me, London represents adulthood. I finally, I'm here, I'm earning enough to live here, and some things are clicking into place. There's a very different way you can experience London. You can come and, see how things go and join a temping agency. And my wife did that a few years ago and found it extremely hard. She got a lot out of it, but found it extremely hard. I don't know. I think different types of people. I'm sure you could break down the types of London goers into a finite number of categories. I think you've got your 1 year kind of gap year people who come to work in bars and travel. It's a very distinct group from the young professionals who leave uni and go, I'm going to go to England and earn some pounds and buy my house and then come home when I want kids. That they tend to stay for 4 to 5 years. And I think that's I think you can categorise them. They don't sort of cross over. Those ones are a little bit ashamed of the backpackers doing the Guinness World Record attempt at pub crawling with a special t-shirt and the Kontiki sort of style thing. The professionals, the ones doing the 4 or 5 years, really feel like they have integrated and they're doing the right thing. And yet on a Saturday night, they'll all go to a pub and there'll be Australians and not one English person in the whole place. I've sort of interacted with that group a bit. And then I think you've got your creative artists and stuff who go without such a finite plan, just knowing that there's more of an industry over here, and they either sink or swim and either last 6 months or never go home. I think making cultural statements about a culture of people is ridiculous. I sort of have a notion of what an Australian is, but I think of all the individual friends I have and none of them necessarily adhere to that notion. However, having said that, I think all individuals are unique. There are people over here who I think exhibit more Australianness than Australians, whatever that means. I guess the one thing I think that I've noticed is enthusiasm. I know that sounds like a cliche, and it's not a Steve Irwin enthusiasm. It's Londoners seem to habitually be sort of slightly more reticent to throw themselves, their body and soul and love and energy into anything, as if they've been burnt by something, as if as a population this city's been hurt too many times, I don't know, maybe it comes from the plague, but there's an innocence, there's a naive enthusiasm about Australians, and I know that can't possibly be true, but it's reflected mostly, I think, in the service industry. Over here, you just cannot, people just don't, they look like they're doing you a huge favour by just turning up to do your plumbing, and that you're very lucky they're there, and they're lucky they don't just tell you to bugger off and go home, and I know that's a huge generalisation because there's very enthusiastic service people as well, but as a rule, you go into a pub in Australia and there'll be a young person just really polishing the glasses, a lot of the time, and over here you just never get it, and it's almost a naivety, a youthful enthusiasm sort of thing. We're culturally probably more proud. I think we've always been proud, whether or not the pride is outgrown its defensiveness. Out of an era of cultural cringe, the pride, just like a kid who used to be fat at school and turns out being good looking and having Roaccutane and having perfect skin and good teeth, the arrogance that comes out of a post-spotty teenager is a defensive one. They never quite get over the fact that they were spotty and fat. And I think Australia's pride can be defensive. It can be like, yeah, we're as good as anyone. What are you going to say about that? And our obsession with sport and winning. There are a couple of things that have made me feel sick about Australia. They're usually sporting related, not least of all the booing during the Croatian national anthem, was it, in the World Cup qualifiers? Things like that, where you just go, all right, it's all right to be proud, but don't be defensive about it. I think that's quite a uniquely, and in that case shamefully, Australian thing, to be proud to the extent that you're actually not being very classy about being proud, you're being defensively proud. And there's a danger to that. People I talk to over here, or I've heard a lot of people go, you guys take your sport way too seriously. And oh no, we don't, we just think it's a laugh. But then every now and then you go, ooh. And things like that, the fact that we're competing and winning, we probably haven't quite reached our full maturity yet. We've had our cringe, and now we're proud, but it's tinged with remembering the cringe. And at some point we'll mature to the point where we're no longer ashamed of our past. We're proud, but we're not desperately proud. I guess I assume I'll go back. I imagine it will be a step backwards for my career, but hopefully in my career there's opportunity to establish oneself to such a degree that it doesn't matter where you are. And also I'm intending to be in Australia for a quarter of every year anyway, which is another huge luxury about my industry. I'm back for 3 months in March, and once I get myself established, I hope to be there from Christmas to March every year until my kids need to settle into school. So I hopefully can have the best of both worlds. Hopefully I can skip the best part of winter every year and spend it in summer in Australia. That's what I want to do. And eventually I'd love to live in Australia with my family and my brothers and my nephews and nieces. Hopefully I can do that in such a way that I'm not completely frustrated, and the way to do that will be to stay active and fly to where I need to fly when the work needs to be done. The Australian industry was fine to me, but I didn't ride the Australian industry to a point and then desert it. The Australian industry shrugged its shoulders at me, and it's totally, I know why, it's fine. I have absolutely no resentment for a single missed audition or anything. I don't resent my old agents or anyone. I know I didn't fit particularly into any pocket of the Australian industry, but I don't feel guilt because it didn't, except on the low level, on the local level with people supporting me doing gigs and stuff. The Australian industry didn't give me my leg up. I kind of created work despite the Australian industry, and the English industry said, oh, do you want a career? And I went, yeah, sure. And I don't resent anything, but the Australian industry never said, do you want a career? The Australian industry said, do you want to play the intro to Holy Grail at a pub? And I went, yeah, but only for a couple of years.